Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a jam-packed and exciting show for you today. Briahna, what's in store for us?
Well, we'll be covering the abortion memo leak from many angles today. We'll get into Senator Elizabeth Warren's warning that if Roe v. Wade is stricken down, it will impact working class women the most. And many are questioning what rights beyond abortion will be at risk if the High Court overturns the 1972 landmark decision on a woman's right to choose.
But before we dive into that, the Supreme Court has confirmed that the leak is authentic. Chief Justice Roberts called the infraction an egregious breach of trust and has ordered an investigation into its occurrence.
Meanwhile, President Biden has said he is, quote, not prepared to support ending the Senate filibuster as calls for such a move from abortion rights activists and Democratic lawmakers mount in order to codify Roe v. Wade into law.
So what do you think about, I was hearing a lot of, I think chatter mostly from Republicans that identify and prosecute this person, execute for treason kind of talk.
Yeah, big authoritarian energy coming from the right.
A bit authoritarian. However, okay, and so I'm generally supportive of protections for leakers and whistleblowers, et cetera, who share things the government is hiding from us. This is a little different because, I think it's considerably different. The Supreme Court is supposed to have a collegial process. There should be some good faith and some, I think they should have a general understanding of ability to, talk behind closed doors and come to consensus. I certainly wouldn't. I don't know that I would prosecute if we could identify the person who did this. But
what is the law that's been broken is the
right.
question I would like someone to answer. Because, I clerked, not at this level, but I clerked for a federal district court in the Eastern District of New York. And the rules, the mythology around what happens in chambers stays in chambers are very strong. You're not supposed to allude to cases that you've worked on. You're not supposed to talk about the conversations that you had with your judge. And I always felt it was a little almost culty the way that people take it very, very seriously, but it's a code of honor. It's not an NDA. I didn't sign a document saying I would never talk about anything that happened in chambers. It's just a professional ethics. So while some people obviously are not happy with the leak because they think it might put undue pressure on the conservatives to switch their views from what seems to be the consensus in this opinion, it's not illegal. And the calls to lock whatever 27-year-old clerk probably did this up in jail because they don't like a political outcome is downright authoritarian.
Yeah, so I think I agree. Right, I would definitely fire this person if I figured out who it was. They should lose their job. They should not. They should probably not work in.
Professional consequences, I'm sure, will abound.
So, well, the professional consequence, if it turns out it's some liberal, progressive abortion rights defender who did this, is they will be lionized and celebrated as a hero, and they'll get Courage Awards and ACLU awards. They'll probably be able to be president of the ACLU within a year. So the consequences will actually not be stark.
Well, it's the consequences in a legal context that I would worry about. And these judges obviously are very influential. Many judges have worked at law firms previously. Mm-hmm. And if there was a hope among the clerk that you would go and work at the law firm that your judge worked for, which was the case for me, there might be some professional implications there. Who knows? But I take your point. This person is probably not going to be hurting for having career opportunities down the line. If it was, in fact, a liberal, there are some people who think it was a conservative who was trying to make sure that everyone stays in line if someone's on the fence.
I was seeing, just before we started recording today, I was looking on Twitter and I was seeing a little bit of theorizing about who it might be that I found persuasive, but it's totally speculation, so I'm not going to discuss it beyond that, but I found it kind of persuasive. So, well, anyway, Senator Susan Collins has, quote, expressed concern over the draft, saying it's completely inconsistent with what Justice Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh said in their hearings and in our meetings in my office. Here's Collins on Kavanaugh's views of Roe.
I do not believe that Brett Kavanaugh will overturn
His precedents
Roe
are overturned.
He noted that Roe had been reaffirmed 19 years later by Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and that it was precedent on precedent. He said it should be extremely rare that it be overturned, and it should be an example.
So you have obviously full confidence.
I do.
If she's feeling betrayed, it'd be understandable. She is more than any one senator responsible for Brett Kavanaugh being on the Supreme Court. She famously gave that speech, a speech I think is one of the most effective, powerful, even if you don't like and disagree with what she was doing, a very effective speech where she stood up and finally said, enough is enough. We should confirm this man. This has gone to like show trial levels. A really effective modern political speech. Anybody who hasn't seen it, you should look it up. So the question, of course, is, whether she's being, because I know what you're going to say is that she
We're
is a fair weather, right, with full knowledge that this did imperil Roe.
We are looking at the most gullible woman in America.
I don't think she's gullible. I think she's savvy.
Maybe she's savvy. Maybe she's gullible. If it's the latter, I have some timeshares that I'd like to offer her up for way overpriced.
I don't think she's
But
gullible.
that is why so many people are upset. And we're upset around the time of Kavanaugh. There were many folks, including lots of folks in the Democratic Party, who said over and over again that they didn't think that Roe was really imperiled. Leaders of the Democratic Party, like Nancy Pelosi, so they didn't actually think. She gave an interview to Kara Switzer on her New York Times podcast, I believe in 2020, in the lead up to the election, saying, I don't really think there's any risk that Roe would actually be overturned. There was a belief among many Democrats that the political backlash for Republicans wouldn't be worth the squeeze, and that it benefited both parties to kind of have it hanging in the balance as a threat so that each could use it as a cudgel to get their voters to the polls, even if they didn't like the figurehead that was running, whether it's Trump or Joe Biden or what have you.
Although I guess, to be fair, when Kavanaugh replaced, or it was Kennedy, so at that time, Roe was not under threat. Roe was under threat when Barrett replaced Ginsburg. So at the time Kavanaugh was confirmed, what Susan Collins is saying, that was not changing the composition of the Supreme Court enough to imperil Roe. It was
perception,
Ginsburg holding on not quite until the very end.
Sure, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Your threat perception depends on how confident you were that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer while Obama was still president, was going to persist.
Yeah, well, she wanted Clinton maybe to pick her successor.
Yeah, the hubris is toxic at this point. If the Supreme Court does strike down Roe, here's where abortion would be immediately banned.
And across the country, protesters are gathering in large numbers. Of course, here in front of the Supreme Court, a huge crowd formed yesterday. And on the other coast in Los Angeles, near where Kim is, actually, there were more protests. So here's some footage from that. Not surprising. So I know that Roe v. Wade has a lot of support borne out in polling and survey data. Most Americans think abortion should be legal in some cases. I guess I count myself as among the squishy middle of people who think there should be some limits, but not entirely limited at all. So I can see how this is potentially a political issue that, in theory, could play to some Democratic advantage. On the other hand, I mean, Republican activists, the religious conservatives, have wanted this for decades. I mean, the object of obtaining power was to do this eventually. It was like the main object. So having finally positioned themselves to do it, they would have failed their own most active and politically interested base to not pull that off.
So there is some historical debate about the extent to which abortion rights became a linchpin of the conservative movement, not just at the beginning of the advent of the Federalist Society and a lot of the legal interventions that were designed as a long-term plan to shift the courts, right? But a little bit later on, there's some early documents that show that in the internal discussions, they thought that the abortion issue was something that only kind of crazy fringe evangelicals cared about. And it wasn't until later that they realized the power that stoking that particular cultural battle had originally, in the grand total of what these 5-4 decisions, when you look at them, all the 5-4 decisions that lean Republican, overwhelmingly are about expanding financial economic rights of financial elites for the right. That's the primary goal. It has always been the primary goal of the Federalist Society and the push rightward on the court. However, of course, now it has become a central linchpin issue, and I think you're right. It will be interesting to see whether or not they can back away from this ledge, even if it were to have bad electoral consequences, because it's something that's been so central to the project for so long. I do think, though, even if it does redound in some small benefit for liberals come election season, they're so far in the hole that a little frustration, or a lot of frustration, over losing the right to choose isn't going to really change the broad electoral map at the end of the year.
That's a depressing evaluation if you're a Democrat.
I could be wrong.
All right, well, we'll keep this discussion going later, and I'm looking forward to hearing what's on your radar next, Briahna.